Blood pounded in my ears as I stared at the two bright pink lines on the plastic stick. Caleb, my ruthless alpha stepbrother, had just ruined my family, stripped me of my inheritance, and thrown me out into the freezing rain. He had absolutely no idea the heir he was obsessed with destroying was currently growing inside me. Nobody warns you about the quiet ways your life can end. It rarely happens with a massive explosion. Instead, it crumbles piece by piece until you are left standing in the ruins. My ruin wore tailored Italian suits, smelled aggressively of cedar and impending storms, and went by the name of Caleb Montgomery. My mother Sarah was a gentle Omega who had spent her entire life struggling to make ends meet for the two of us. When I was 19, our luck supposedly changed. She met Richard Montgomery, a wealthy alpha and the CEO of Montgomery Global Enterprises. Richard was kind, generous, and swept my mother off her feet. Within a year, we were moving into his sprawling, oppressive mansion in the wealthy suburbs of Seattle. I thought we had finally found safety. I was incredibly naive. Richard had a son from a previous marriage. Caleb was 24, a purebred, dominant alpha who had been groomed since birth to inherit a corporate empire. From the moment we met in the grand foyer of the Montgomery estate, Caleb made his absolute disdain for us known. He looked at my mother and me not as family, but as opportunistic parasites trying to drain his father's bank accounts. His eyes, a chilling shade of pale blue, would track my every movement with unfiltered suspicion. For 2 years I walked on eggshells. I kept my head down, attended my university classes, and tried to be invisible. As an Omega, I was naturally smaller, and my scent, a soft blend of vanilla and chamomile, was something I constantly kept smothered under heavy suppressants. I did not want to draw Caleb's ire, nor did I want to trigger any territorial alpha instincts in him. But proximity breeds inevitable collisions. The turning point, the night that would ultimately destroy my life, happened in late October. Richard and my mother had flown to London for a 2-week business trip and anniversary vacation. Caleb and I were left alone in the massive house. A freak autumn storm had knocked out the power lines across our neighborhood, plunging the estate into darkness. I was in my room shivering when the first cramp hit. It was not a normal ache. It was a searing, consuming fire that started in my lower abdomen and radiated through my veins. My heat, which had always been perfectly regulated by my medication, broke through my suppressants 3 weeks early. The stress of midterm exams and the sudden drop in temperature must have triggered it. Panic set in as my natural scent flooded the room thick and overwhelming. Before I could lock the door, it swung open. Caleb stood in the frame holding a flashlight, his broad shoulders filling the space. The moment the vanilla and chamomile hit him, the flashlight dropped shattering on the hardwood floor. I saw his pupils dilate, swallowing the pale blue of his irises, until they were completely black. The rational, cold businessman vanished, replaced by an alpha, driven by pure, unadulterated instinct. I should have pushed him away. I should have screamed. But the heat haze had melted my cognitive functions. The cedar and rain scent of him was intoxicating, short-circuiting my brain. That night in the dark, amidst the howling wind, boundaries were obliterated. It was chaotic, desperate, and entirely unprotected. When dawn broke, the storm had passed, and so had the illusion. I woke up bruised and exhausted, only to find Caleb standing by the window, fully dressed, his face a mask of absolute disgust. "Get dressed and clean this up," he ordered, his voice dripping with venom. This was a biological mistake, a glitch. If you ever breathe a word of this to my father, I will personally ensure you and your mother are ruined. He didn't have to threaten me. The shame was enough to keep my mouth shut. But the universe has a cruel sense of timing. Just 4 days later, we received the phone call that shattered our world. Richard Montgomery had suffered a massive, fatal heart attack in his London hotel room. My mother was utterly destroyed. I was numb. But Caleb went to war. The reading of the will took place less than 48 hours after the funeral, overseen by the family attorney Thomas Wright. Richard had intended to update his will to include my mother and me, but he had never gotten around to signing the final paperwork. The legal documents standing were 5 years old. Caleb inherited everything. The company, the accounts, the properties, the cars. All of it. We were sitting in Richard's mahogany-panelled study when Caleb stood up, buttoning his suit jacket with terrifying calm. He looked at my weeping mother, then locked his cold eyes onto mine. "You have 2 hours to pack your things," Caleb stated, his tone devoid of any human empathy. "Security will escort you off the premises. If you attempt to take anything that belonged to my father, I will have you arrested for theft." "Caleb, please," my mother begged, her voice cracking. "We have nowhere to go. Richard promised. My father is dead because a gold-digging Omega drained the life out of him." Caleb snarled, slamming his fist onto the desk. "You are nothing to this family. You are nothing to me. Get out of my house." I didn't plead. I knew, looking into those eyes, that there was no mercy to be found. The alpha who had held me in the dark just days prior was now looking at me like I was vermin. I packed my mother's bags, grabbed my own duffel, and walked out of the iron gates of the Montgomery estate, entirely unaware that the nightmare had only just begun. The first few weeks after our eviction were a blur of desperation and survival. Seattle is an unforgiving city when you have no money and nowhere to go. I managed to use the last of my savings to put my mother on a bus to Oregon, where her sister lived. She wept the entire time, apologizing for dragging me into a life that ended in such humiliation. I hugged her, promising I would figure things out and send for her once I was on my feet. For myself, I swallowed my pride and called Noah Collins. Noah was a beta I had known since our freshman year of college, a loyal friend who managed a cramped, run-down apartment above a noisy laundromat in the University District. When I showed up on his doorstep, soaking wet from the perpetual Seattle rain, carrying nothing but a duffel bag, he didn't ask questions. He just pulled out a blanket and pointed to his lumpy sofa. I immediately dropped out of university. I couldn't afford the tuition, and I needed to survive. I spent my days trudging through the grey city streets, applying for any minimum wage job that didn't require a background check. But something was fundamentally wrong with my body. At first, I blamed it on the stress. The grief of losing my stepfather, the trauma of the eviction, and the anxiety of homelessness were enough to make anyone physically ill. I was constantly exhausted. My bones felt like lead, and my usually sharp senses were completely out of whack. But then the nausea started. It was violent, unrelenting sickness that hit me every morning, the moment my feet touched the linoleum floor. One afternoon, 3 weeks into my stay at Noah's, I passed out while organizing boxes in the back room of a thrift store I was interviewing at. I woke up to Noah shaking my shoulders, having been called by the panicked manager. "You look like a ghost, Oliver." Noah said, his brow furrowed in deep concern. "I don't care if we don't have insurance. I'm taking you to the free clinic." That is how I ended up sitting on the crinkling paper of an examination table at the downtown community health center, staring at Dr. Benjamin Carter. Dr. Carter was an older beta with tired eyes, but a gentle demeanor. He ran a series of blood tests, asking me routine questions about my diet, my stress levels, and my recent heat cycles. When he came back into the room, holding a manila folder. His expression was unreadable. Oliver. Dr. Carter started pulling up a stool to face me directly. When was your last heat? About a month ago. I replied, my voice raspy. It was irregular. It came early. He nodded slowly. And were you intimate with an alpha during that time? My stomach plummeted. The memory of Caleb's heavy breathing, the scent of cedar, the bruising grip of his hands. It all flashed behind my eyes. I swallowed hard and nodded. Dr. Carter sighed, opening the folder. Oliver Omega pregnancies are rare, and they only occur under highly specific biological conditions. But your HCG levels are unmistakably elevated. You are approximately 5 weeks pregnant. The sterile walls of the clinic seemed to close in on me. A high-pitched ringing echoed in my ears. Pregnant. The word felt foreign, impossible. I was a 19-year-old college dropout sleeping on a broken sofa, wearing donated clothes, and I was carrying the child of the billionaire alpha who had literally thrown me onto the street. No, I whispered, shaking my head frantically. No, that's impossible. It was just one night. It was a mistake. Biology doesn't care about mistakes, Dr. Carter said softly, offering me a tissue. You have some very difficult decisions to make. Given your stress levels and current weight, this is a high-risk situation. You need prenatal vitamins, a stable environment, and peace. Peace? That was hilarious. I left the clinic clutching a plastic bag full of generic vitamins and a list of resources for low-income expecting parents. I walked for hours in the drizzle, my mind racing through a million terrifying scenarios. If I told Caleb, what would he do? He despised me. He thought of me as a gold digger. He would either force me to terminate the pregnancy, or worse, he would use his immense wealth and legal power to take the child away from me the second it was born, leaving me with absolutely nothing. I knew his ruthlessness. I had watched him erase my mother and me from his father's legacy without blinking. I made a vow right there on the wet pavement of 4th Avenue. Caleb Montgomery would never know about this child. I would change my last name. I would disappear into the fabric of the city. I would protect this baby with my life. A week later, I finally secured a job as a barista at a high-end coffee shop in the financial district. It paid decent tips, and they offered basic health coverage after 90 days. I threw myself into the work, ignoring the morning sickness, masking my scent heavily, and saving every single penny in a jar under Noah's sink. I thought I was safe. I thought the financial district, with its thousands of anonymous corporate drones, would be the perfect place to hide in plain sight. I had successfully managed to evade my past for 2 entire months. My stomach was just beginning to show the slightest, barely noticeable curve, a secret I kept hidden under oversized black aprons. Then came a Tuesday morning in December. The bell above the cafe door chimed, signaling a rush of morning executives. I was steaming milk, my back to the counter, when a scent hit me so hard it almost knocked me off my feet. It cut through the heavy aroma of roasted espresso and burnt sugar like a finely sharpened blade. Cedar. Rain. Dominance. My breath caught in my throat. My hands began to violently tremble, nearly dropping the metal pitcher. Slowly, agonizingly, I turned around to face the register. Standing there in a bespoke charcoal suit, flanked by 2 corporate lawyers, was Caleb Montgomery, and his pale blue eyes were staring directly into mine. Time froze. That is the only way to describe the sensation of your heart, completely stopping in your chest while the rest of the world continues to spin. Caleb Montgomery stood at the register, radiating an aura of sheer, suffocating dominance that made the hairs on my arms stand straight up. His bespoke charcoal suit looked painfully out of place against the backdrop of our rustic, slightly battered indie coffee shop. He was flanked by two men whose stiff postures and blank expressions screamed corporate security. I could not breathe. The vanilla and chamomile scent I tried so desperately to hide beneath harsh, chemical suppressants threatened to spike with my rising panic. Caleb did not say a word at first. He just looked at me, his pale blue eyes dropping from my pale face down to the oversized black apron draped over my torso. He stepped up to the counter, dismissing his guards with a subtle flick of his wrist. "A black espresso." Caleb said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that sent a terrifying shiver down my spine. "And a moment of your time, Oliver." "I am working." I managed to choke out my voice, trembling entirely against my will. I turned around blindly, my hands shaking so violently I nearly dropped the ceramic cup as I pulled his shot. When I placed it on the counter, I refused to meet his gaze. "You look terrible," he noted coldly, ignoring the coffee. "Dark circles, pale skin. Working for minimum wage clearly does not suit you. I suppose you miss my father's credit cards." Anger finally pierced through my terror. "I never touched your father's money, Caleb. You made sure of that when you threw my mother and me onto the street with nothing. Now take your coffee and leave. I have customers." Caleb's jaw clenched. For a fraction of a second, the cedar and rain scent spiking from him grew sharp, almost aggressive. He leaned in closer, and I instinctively took a step back, my hand moving protectively over my stomach. It was a micro-movement entirely subconscious, but Caleb Montgomery missed absolutely nothing. His eyes locked onto my hand. His nostrils flared slightly, taking in the air around me. "I will be seeing you, Oliver," he whispered, turning on his heel and walking out into the freezing Seattle morning. I did not finish my shift. The moment the door closed, I told my manager I was throwing up and ran to the back room. I tore off my apron, grabbed my coat, and bolted. I knew how Caleb operated. He was a predator. If he sensed weakness, or if he suspected I was hiding something, he would tear the city apart to figure it out. I ran the entire way back to Noah's apartment. I burst through the door, startling Noah, who was eating cereal on the couch. I frantically began throwing my meager belongings into my duffel bag. "Oliver, what is going on?" "You are hyperventilating," Noah shouted, dropping his bowl and rushing over to grab my shoulders. He found me. Caleb was at the coffee shop. I sobbed, the adrenaline finally crashing and leaving me a weeping, exhausted mess. I have to leave Seattle. I have to go today. If he finds out about the baby, he will kill me or he will take him. "Noah, I need to go." Noah tried to calm me down, offering to drain his tiny savings account to buy me a bus ticket to Portland. We spent the next 3 hours planning a desperate escape. But we had vastly underestimated the reach of a billionaire alpha. At exactly 4 o'clock in the afternoon, a heavy rhythmic knocking echoed through the cramped apartment. Noah looked at me, his face draining of color. He walked to the door and looked through the peephole. He did not even have time to speak before the door was forced open. Caleb walked into the tiny, dingy apartment, his mere presence completely swallowing the small space. 2 massive security guards stepped in behind him, gently but firmly pushing Noah against the wall. "Get out of my apartment, I am calling the police," Noah yelled, struggling against the guard's grip. "Leave him alone, Caleb," I screamed, stepping between them. "He has nothing to do with this." Caleb waved his hand, and the guards released Noah, stepping out into the hallway and pulling the door shut behind them, leaving us alone in the suffocating silence. Caleb stood in the center of the living room, looking at the peeling wallpaper and the stained carpet with absolute disgust. Then he reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a thick manila folder. My blood ran completely cold. It looked exactly like the folder Dr. Benjamin Carter had held at the clinic. "Simon Fletcher is the best private investigator on the West Coast," Caleb stated, his voice terrifyingly calm. "I hired him 2 months ago to keep an eye on you. I wanted to ensure you and your mother were not planning to contest my father's will." Imagine my utter shock when Simon handed me this file an hour ago. He threw the folder onto the cheap coffee table. It burst open, spilling medical records, ultrasound printouts, and blood test results across the wood. "You are pregnant," Caleb said, taking a step towards me. The cold, calculating CEO was gone. In his place was a deeply agitated, intensely territorial alpha. "You are 5 months pregnant, and considering the timeline and the pathetic sheltered life you lived under my roof, there is only one biological possibility." "It's none of your business," I cried, backing away until my shoulders hit the wall. "It was a mistake. You said it yourself. You called it a biological glitch. I don't want anything from you. I will sign whatever NDA you want. Just let me leave." Caleb closed the distance between us in 2 massive strides. He slammed his hands against the wall on either side of my head, trapping me. His pale blue eyes were practically glowing with an intense dark emotion I could not comprehend. "A mistake," he growled, his scent exploding into the room thick with possessiveness. "You are carrying my heir. You are carrying Montgomery blood, and you thought you could hide him in a rat-infested apartment above a laundromat. He is my baby," I yelled, pushing against his solid chest, though it was like pushing against a brick wall. "He is mine," Caleb stated, with absolute terrifying finality. "And you are coming back to the estate. Tonight." "I would rather die," I spat. Caleb leaned in his lips, brushing against the shell of my ear. "If you try to run Oliver, I will freeze every bank account attached to your mother. I will have my lawyers declare you mentally unfit and destitute. I will take this child the second he takes his first breath in a hospital, and you will never see him again. But if you come with me, you will both be protected, and your mother will be financially secure for the rest of her life. The choice is yours." It was no choice at all. It was an execution. Returning to the Montgomery estate felt like walking into a nightmare. Escorted to the south wing, I was given the master suite, the heavy doors locked from the outside. I was a prisoner, wrapped in silk. The next 3 months were a psychological roller coaster. I expected Caleb to treat me like an incubator. Instead, his behavior became erratic. He hired a private prenatal specialist who visited 3 times a week. Caleb demanded to be present for every appointment, watching the ultrasound screen with a hunger that terrified me. He dictated my diet, replacing generic vitamins with custom supplements. Every evening, he unlocked my door to sit silently across from my bed, reading files while keeping me in his sight. He never touched me, but his presence was a constant weight. His scent, cedar and rain, had shifted. It was no longer aggressive. It was thick, soothing, and fiercely protective. My omega biology began to crave it. I hated myself for it. During my 8th month, heavily pregnant and suffering from insomnia, I wandered out of my suite during a thunderstorm. Walking past Richard's old study, I saw the door ajar. I peeked inside and froze. Caleb sat on the floor, surrounded by scattered, yellowing papers. A half-empty Scotch bottle sat beside him. He looked completely broken, hands buried in his dark hair. "Caleb," I whispered. His head snapped up. His eyes were bloodshot, swimming with unshed tears. For the first time, he did not look like a ruthless billionaire, but a deeply wounded boy. "You shouldn't be awake, Oliver," he muttered quickly. shoving the papers into a safe behind a bookshelf. "What are those?" I asked, stepping into the room. Caleb let out a bitter laugh. "These are my father's true legacy. The legacy I have been trying to clean up for 5 years." He handed me a crumpled letter detailing massive illegal embezzlements. The horrifying truth began to unravel. Richard had not been a brilliant businessman. He was a degenerate gambler who secretly bankrupted the company and borrowed millions from dangerous loan sharks. "He married your mother." Caleb's voice cracked, because her sister was married to a federal judge. He thought the connection would offer political protection from the investigations closing in. He used her as a human shield. I stared at him, my world tilting. "But why did you throw us out? Why hate us?" Caleb looked away, shame painting his features. "When he died, the sharks came calling. They threatened to burn this estate to the ground. If you had been named in the will, you would have inherited his massive debts. I threw you out to sever your legal ties to the Montgomery name to keep you alive. I took the debt. I spent the last year liquidating my own trust funds to pay them off and keep you safe." Tears streamed down my face. "You called me a gold digger. You treated me like dirt." "I had to make you hate me," Caleb whispered, looking up. "I had to make sure you never looked back. But then I found out about the baby. My baby. I realized I had destroyed the only real family I had left." Before I could respond, a blinding pain ripped through my abdomen. It was an agonizing, tearing sensation. Warm fluid gushed down my legs. "Oliver!" Caleb shouted, catching me before my knees hit the hardwood. "It's too early," I sobbed. "It hurts, Caleb." The next hours were a chaotic blur of sirens and hospital lights. I had gone into severe premature labor. As the medical team rushed me down the sterile corridors, Caleb refused to let go of my hand, using his alpha dominance to demand they save us. In the operating room right before the anesthesia pulled me under, Caleb pressed his forehead against mine. "Please, Oliver," he cried. "Please don't leave me, just live." Waking up a day later, sunlight streamed through the blinds. Sitting beside my bed, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blue blanket, was Caleb. When he saw my eyes open, a fragile smile broke across his face. He gently placed the bundle into my arms. Theodore Montgomery. He was perfectly healthy with my nose. Caleb pulled out a thick envelope. "Full custody papers," he said softly, "and a trust fund for you and Theo. The debts are paid. The estate is secure. You can leave, and I will never hunt you down. I promise." I looked at Caleb. The ruthless monster was gone. In his place stood a man who sacrificed everything to protect us. I reached out my fingers, grasping his wrist. "Theo needs his father," I whispered. "And I think I need you to stay." "Tanao." Caleb fell to his knees, crying as the scent of cedar rain and peaceful vanilla filled the room. The golden cage was finally open, but for the first time I chose to stay. If you were shocked by the dark truth behind Caleb's cruelty and the emotional roller coaster of our hospital emergency, please smash that like button and subscribe to the channel right now. Share this video with anyone who loves an intense Omegaverse redemption story. Drop a comment below, letting me know if you would have forgiven Caleb after everything he put you through. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss another dramatic real-life story.